Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions, Dizzying Distinctions, and Diabolical Doctrines, a series sorting through some of the jargon of philosophy. In this video we're going to be looking at what is fascism. Now, the term fascist is often used pejoratively as an insult for anyone on the more authoritarian end of the political spectrum. This use of the term is nonspecific, and it doesn't accurately describe the philosophy of fascism. There is a philosophy underlying fascism. In order to promote a more accurate and specific use of the term fascism, in this video we're going to look at the philosophy of fascism, which thrived in Italy under Mussolini from the early 1920s to the early 1940s, specifically as it was espoused by Giovanni Gentile and later Benito Mussolini. Note that this will focus on the philosophy of fascism, not necessarily the active practice of it. And this isn't to say that we may as a society have not evolved another meaning of fascism, which is just an insult for a political ideology that we don't like. Rather, this is to say that the technical definition of fascism isn't just, ooh, boo, bad ideology that I'm not happy with. It has a specific meaning, and that's what we're going to look at today. So, Gentile wrote of a more moderate fascism before his works revised by Mussolini. So we're going to cover his fascism first, and then look at Mussolini's. Fascism, in this context, was meant to provide a method of government which did not lead to the inequality of capitalism, nor the class warfare of socialism. Rather, it united everyone under a strong central government. According to Gentile, the state should embody the people. All aspects of society should be part of the state. Trade federations, unions, corporations, any organizations should be made into state corporations. These organizations did not need to compete with the state or each other, but rather they needed to work together towards a common goal. If we got all of those organizations under one roof working together, they would be able to better achieve that common goal because they could work in synergy as opposed to in competition. According to Gentile, it is not the responsibility of the state to protect the freedom of individuals to act as they wish. Rather, the liberty that we should concern ourselves with is the liberty of the state to enact its will on the world. And the people should freely accept the will of the state as the guiding principle of their actions. Basically, instead of centering the principle of liberty on an individual, fascism places it at the level of the state. You might think of this as it not making sense to speak of liberty of a stomach or a nose. They are constituent parts of something else. Fascism works to make people constituent parts of the state and then give the state freedom to act. Now, even before looking at Mussolini's more extreme version of fascism, there's some concerns with Gentile's version that we might want to express. While the state may make the people a part of itself through various corporations, it doesn't follow that those corporations will be able to effectively influence the state, or that there will be an effective means of influence from the individuals in those corporations to the state such that those people can really be embodied by the state, particularly when there are competing desires from different state corporations or between a corporation and the state. Additionally, while it may be a goal for everyone to freely accept the will of the state, that is unlikely to happen in reality, leading to the state needing to forcefully impose its will. Giovanni talks about these great ways that, the people will accept the will of the state into them and they will freely do it, and that is the freedom that matters. Most people aren't necessarily going to do that. And so, or at least some people aren't. And if some people don't do that, the state has to step in and forcefully impose its will, which stops looking like a kind of freedom or a kind of state that we would like, generally. From the capitalist perspective, there's a concern that a lack of competition between corporations will lead to, and kind of a lack of market structures will lead to corruption and mismanagement of those corporations because they won't have an incentive to innovate, they won't have an incentive to maximize the goods that they're providing or the quality of the things that they're giving to their consumers because they don't have any competition and they can rely on the state to support them. And finally, and quite importantly, there's a concern that the will of the state will simply be the will of the leader of that state, and such a will may be immoral or not representative of the will of the people. The freedom of the state to act makes it so that the leader of the state can act however they please, even in ways which we might consider unethical, immoral, and potentially quite harmful. With that, brings us to Mussolini. Many of these fears, particularly the last one, were realized in Mussolini's revisions to the fascist doctrine. Mussolini embraced the claim that violence was more important than belief, and that violence was the best kind of propaganda. He claimed that violence was a superior method of the people to demonstrate their political wills than elections or referendums. For Mussolini, violence was something to be rejoiced in, and it was required for a nation to reach its true potential. Basically, Mussolini was making the claim that the way the government or the state should be responsive to the people is if the government is doing something the people won't like, the people will rise up and they'll overthrow the government. If the people are unable to do that, they clearly don't have severe enough grievances with the state, and the state has a right to oppress them. For Mussolini, violence was something to be rejoiced in, and it was required for the nation to reach its true potential. Mussolini's fascism opposed multilateral organizations, like at the time the League of Nations, as he thought the good nation should be ready to fight its neighbors at all times and gain glory through battle, and that the honorable servants of the state would be exposed and brought to honor through battle and through their willingness to fight for the state. It is important to note that while Mussolini did side with Hitler in World War II and enacted some anti-Semitic policies, this was not a central part of at least philosophical fascism. He argued that the state was not made up of a particular race of people, but that multiple people were bound together by an ideology, the ideology of the strong central state. Fascism did advocate for violence and the subjugation of the individual to the state, but as a philosophy, it did not advocate for racist or discriminatory policies. Many people in the modern world consider both violence and racism to be bad things, and often because both fascism and Nazism were on the same side in World War II, those things are conflated. It's important to note, though, at least philosophically, the philosophical position of fascism wasn't tied up in those kind of racist and discriminatory policies. It was deeply tied to the ideas of using violence as a tool for gaining power, as a tool for oppression, but it wasn't tied into that kind of discriminatory nature that existed in a much stronger way in Nazi Germany. In retrospect, many may have concerns with Mussolini's philosophy, even without the racism exported from Hitler's Germany. Many find war and death to be bad things, to be avoided, not the kind of things to be embraced and glory gained through. This poses a problem not merely for Mussolini's fascism, which embraced violence, but also Gentile's, which allowed for a violent leader to subjugate the state and to basically impose their will and say, I am the state, so I'm going to impose this onto the people, and the people should freely accept that which is the will of the state. The impact of things like the Long Peace, which followed World War II, is evidence for the power of multilateral organizations like the UN, the World Trade Organization, and the World Bank to lead to peace, prosperity, and economic growth. If peace, prosperity, and economic growth are the kinds of things you think are good, you probably have a lot of problems with Mussolini's philosophy of violence and active opposition between states. Additionally, one might be concerned with violence as a method for the people to enact their will on a government, as might, not reason or compassion to make the rules. Basically, Mussolini's philosophy of fascism boils down to might makes right in terms of the way that the people can respond to their government. And so, if you think that, no, we should make laws and decisions about what the state is doing based on logic and reason, or based on democracy and popular opinion, or based on morals or values, This philosophy isn't for you. If you think that the strongest, the most violent, those that have the most physical power should make the rules and should be able to influence the state, that's where fascism sits. Therefore, the term fascist can apply, in part at least, to a modern government or policymaker which subjugates the will of the people to the will of the state, one that's glorifying and promoting violence, one that claims that regime change should occur through violent revolution as opposed to democratic election, or one that's tearing down multilateral institutions, trade institutions, or things like the United Nations, of peace and cooperation in favor of more violent nationalist policies. However, a government advocating just non-interventionalist policies, saying, we're not going to step in that war halfway across the world, or racist policies, or even socialist policies, is not fascist just because it advocates for those policies. Remember, the fascists set themselves aside specifically both from the capitalists as well as from the socialists for a range of reasons. So, the next time someone calls you a fascist, ask them why, or show them this video. What do you think? Are there elements of fascism that belong in modern government? Are there modern politicians that you think have been accurately or inaccurately called fascist? If so, why? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.